So, in case you haven't heard, critical race theory or CRT has become one of the hottest topics on social media in history. On this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what CRT is, why it is taught, and where it is taught. And I'm also going to tell you why it's important for you to be aware of this topic and what you can do about it to either support it or go against it. CRT, by definition, is a teaching to students, namely children nowadays, where we teach them the country's real history and race relations. So I want to frame this conversation in a normal scenario, such as when, let's just say, a man, it could be a man or a woman, but when a man is upset or offended at a woman. So typically, what would happen is that the man in this scenario will become triggered and emotional about the situation. That emotion will lead to storytelling that is completely one sided, therefore causing logical people on the other side of the argument to go, well, this is illogical because you're only telling one side of the story, the emotional side of the story. Now, any logical person in that scenario will know that if you want to actually hear the truth, what you need to do, and the only thing you could do, is get together both parties, bring them both into the room, hear both sides of the story. And then if you want to create your own narrative from there, that would be fair. But many psychologists have blogs and articles and videos about the fact that if you're only hearing one side of the story, the chances of you actually knowing the truth is nearly impossible. What you really have learned is a half truth. And according to definition, a half truth is actually a lie. So, as in the case of CRT, you have random, routine school board meetings happening all over the country, and they instantly turn into absolute pandemonium. And the question here is who is to blame for that? But I want you to consider this. Politically, dictators will always side with something like any uprising at all must be inherently wrong, versus democracy plays it out this way. Peaceful uprisings must all be heard. So, with that as the basis, let's go into what is CRT, how is it taught, and why is it important? I'm going to take you through these things very quickly. So, critical race theory is simply this: it is a teaching that white people are inherently racist in that they should feel ashamed about this. Therefore, they should give up their positions or place in line or in society to minority groups. So, where is CRT taught? It is unabashedly taught in many US colleges, Ivy Leagues, and particularly law schools, where they can help train the future lobbyists, lawyers, politicians, and business leaders to support and push the critical race theory. Now, this started in the 1970s. So when you come full circle now, 50 years later, it is not uncommon that you see lobbyists, lawyers, politicians, and business leaders seemingly having this belief. And when you follow the money, this teaching in schools just happened to be timed right after associations that are predominantly funded by George Soros just happened to start pouring millions and millions of dollars into these particular schools. Now, fairly speaking, CRT is trying to teach students that racist laws are inherently baked into all American institutes and laws. And whether it is intentional or not, these things must all be abolished. So, why is this even important? Or is it? Well, the first thing to note here is that institutions waited patiently for years, maybe decades, until a national event could be leveraged to fuel people's anger over race relations. So those individual students who have been placed out into American society and politics have also networked with Soros-funded media outlets, news outlets, and social media outlets to time the perfect incident to launch the topic of critical race theory, aka America is inherently racist, onto the national platform. And the timing randomly could not be more perfect than in May of 2020, an election year, and the most contentious election we've ever had in American history, at least in the last 100 years. The George Floyd murder incident came onto the scene. This was the big one that social media outlets and business leaders who had been trained in critical race theory, this is the big one they were waiting for. So these media outlets pushed this murder incident through their feeds as the most trending topic ever in social media history. And absolutely, this murderous incident showed that some police have flaws, do things wrong, take the law into their own hands, and on statistically extremely rare incidents, kill people unlawfully. Now, although this incident statistically was so rare that of the 13 million Black people in the country, approximately 200 of them die from a white cop every year. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Black people kill each other every year, and those murders seemingly go completely unnoticed, causing logical people to think, is this really about Black people? Or is this about pushing leftist propaganda? But some of the brightest thinkers around the world also began to speak out and say things like, what happened was a complete tragedy. It should not have happened. But namely, because George Floyd should not have resisted arrest, which is a crime. And those laws need to be enforced. And the reality is, because of propaganda pushed by the left, those laws are not enforced. He should have been forced into the cop car. If he resisted, maybe he gets roughed up a little bit getting put into the cop car. But because of making police sensitive to things like this, nothing happened. The incident spiraled out of control. One officer got emotionally pissed and murdered this guy for everyone in the country to see. But some of the brightest minds in the world began to say, if he didn't resist arrest, he would still be alive today. So sadly, both the police clearly and George Floyd were in the wrong. So because most of the public lives off of emotions and fear, and it doesn't matter if you're religious, you go to church, you raise your hands, you give to the church, whatever, the reality is most people live off emotions and fear, and that is how they make decisions. And this is precisely why the far left's plan worked to the T. And from a strategy and a business strategy standpoint, it was absolutely a masterpiece. Morally, I think it was flawed. But when you look at what they did, patience and all those things, I mean, this is classic art of war type of strategy. So now the battle lines between your pro CRT people and your anti CRT people have been drawn. The right has clearly used CRT as a trigger word to alert people and parents of what is being taught now to their children. So the left quickly removed the term from all of their talking points, church curriculum, off the internet, everywhere, then began saying they don't even know what it is, all meanwhile still leveraging with the four cornerstones of CRT, still teaching those fluently in our schools and in our institutions, but just calling it something different. So one of the strongest and most repeated arguments from the left is, hey, we teach things like world history, wars, presidents. Why don't we talk about racism? Now, look, that may not be a very bad argument because I do think that we smooth over some of the atrocities of this country. But what is a balanced way to look at it? Should we focus on the atrocities and the bad and the horrible things of the past? Or should we focus on the good and great things of the past? And what is the truth behind both of those? And I think you should also ask yourself, what do you want people to know you for? Do you want people to know for all of your atrocities? Or do you want people to know about the good and great things that you did and how you overcame? Because like the Bible says, it is standard sinful human nature to demand justice on other people. I want justice. I want to know what is right and what is wrong, everything about that person. But on yourself, you demand grace. Oh God, make sure that other people don't see me for how bad I am. Help them to see how good I am. So quickly, how is American history taught in relation to all other history? The current way that US history is taught actually aligns perfectly with the way that almost all history is taught around the world, meaning we focus more on the good and noble things than all the bad things that have happened. Now, I personally think that we could find better ways to talk more constructively about race and race relations of the past. So if people want to move forward with the teaching of this topic, it really should be drafted between a co-partnership of both parties of how two different sides of the argument feel and think about it and come up with some mutually agreed upon teaching. And if they don't, this is America. One side can go out and tell their story however they want in the public or through books and literature and all those kind of things. But in terms of what is curriculum paid for by the American public, these things should be representative of the people. They should be by the people, and they should be for the people. And lastly, for everyone who wants a deeper, more true revelation of American history, make sure you include these 5 quick points. Number 1, Black people were not captured in their own native land by a bunch of chunky white guys who came in on boats. No, Black people rallied them up, enslaved people, groups, and clans that they didn't like or had an issue with, and sold them as slaves all around the world, but mostly to America. Number 2, racism didn't start in America because back then slavery was biggest in the UK, in China, and in Africa, which, by the way, 2 out of those 3 countries still lead the world in slavery today. Number 3, there were countless Christian white political leaders or influencers back in those days, such as William Wilberforce, who led the revolt against slavery. And these people were willing to die for the cause. And number four, leaders of this country agreed that slavery and racism was wrong and that things needed to change. And we valiantly fought to the death for the equal rights of all people, including blacks, minorities, and women. And we became the world leader in abolishing things like slavery and racism, causing the world to see slavery as a taboo for the first time in history. And number five, countries like Korea, China, and Africa still to this day lead the world in slavery. But somehow the left, in many different ways, continues to be embedded in supporting these countries. They certainly will not talk against any of them in public or denounce any of the slavery happening to hundreds of thousands of people every single day, which only causes all logical people in the world to think, is this really about slavery and racism? Or is it about degrading the idea of America and tearing this nation apart? Thanks for watching. You let me know.